Good day, Merv. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I was just looking over the choice of topics that we have today, treatment of the staff and the team. And I was thinking about this mainly because, in 40 years of project management, all I've ever dealt with is teams, right? I mean,
Mhm.
teams and clients, teams and stakeholders, teams. And I remember very distinctly, I think this is going to draw some great discussion today. I remember distinctly going in and doing a project review of a major project that was in fairly serious trouble. I mean, it was not insurmountable, but I began to interview the staff one at a time. And I don't know if they collected their thoughts before I came, but here's what I heard. We're nothing but a bunch of mushrooms. Right? What do you mean you're mushrooms? What does that mean? So they keep us in the dark and they feed us garbage.
Yep.
And I thought how fitting that was. And then another person said, we're just a cog in this machine. We're here, we're at the beck and call of the project manager. If we do something, we're a replaceable part, a replaceable cog. And I was thinking, it's no wonder that project was unhealthy. The project manager tried to blame the client. As I dug through, I decided that the blame was equal parts on our side as well with the project management process. So I don't know if that rings any bells with you, but cogs and mushrooms is what I got out of that project review.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And actually in a major project, it's very easy, even for a very successful, very mature project manager. It's easy to slip into that bias. Um, we talk about all the time managing as a set of directives. Do this, this, and this. And then we talk about leading as establishing a vision and delegating, right? Now, one of the things that I learned over time, and it took about two sticks to the back of my head to learn this, was that if you lead by direction, if you manage, let's say that you're telling somebody to go from one set of side of the room to another, and they're moving boxes, right? If you manage them, if you give them directions, you shove a chair in front of them, they're not going to know what to do. But if you give them the idea, the vision, the motivation, I need those boxes to go from here to here. I don't know how to do it best. You guys do this all the time. I'll let you figure it out. And if you give them the support they need, the room they need to figure out, they're going to find a better way of doing it. And so I use this example all the time as saying, there's a better way of doing things and telling them what people are good at, right? It's allowing people to figure out their own good ideas, and often they're better than the ones you can. So this cog in a wheel is not just it's not just demotivating, it's also getting in the way of innovation. It's amazing that people actually go through their whole management careers without this major step.
Well, and I tell you, I've had that happen to me also as a consultant. So I'm brought on, and this has happened, well, at least once, maybe twice, once for sure, where I was brought on as a fairly high paid consultant in a very, very specific task that people knew me in the industry for. And as I was working on this project, it was amazing to me how the project manager, who considered himself very mature as a project manager, would only come to me with directives or when he needed information. And what was interesting to me, even though I wanted to understand sort of the next steps or the end goals so that I could direct the team he assigned to me correctly or properly in that direction, it was sort of like, now you're a consultant, you don't need to know. Well, what ended up happening many times is as a result of that, I would make an assumption that this is where we're going, take my team sort of off the path, and then a couple of weeks later realize that we weren't exactly heading towards that goal. And then he would come in all huffy puffy and say, this is what we need. And I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me that 2 weeks ago when I asked you? I could have easily directed our team towards that direction. So keeping people in the dark, mushrooms, I love that. I love that particular analogy, mushroom, keeping them in the dark and feeding them garbage. They didn't use the word garbage, but you get the drift. And
Uh-huh.
so it's to me, you have to maintain transparency, and there's a need to know and a right to know, and there is a requirement to know, so that you can, as you said, when you put that box in front of them, they know how to get around it because they know what the end goal is, and they're better at it than you are. So yeah, absolutely.
And that's the key. It's the difference between reactive work and proactive work. It's the difference between being in a crisis constantly and being ahead of the curve. A lot of this you learn by accident or mistake, but the brilliant thing is we don't have to. We can actually listen to each other, and we can actually use our metrics to figure this out.
Oh,
I, I'm both surprised, confused, and expectant that people are going to do this when they first are managers. They direct because they're afraid of all of this handing over of power and authority because they're so accountable. But on the other hand, they don't get what they want by giving directions. By giving directions, you get steps.
right.
By giving leadership, you get the results of the team.
Well, wasn't that Lao Tzu who said to lead the team, walk behind them? Isn't that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
so?
it's a,
If he was to walk behind them and direct them, then he had to have shown them the vision to send
yeah.
them off. So it just, and that was several thousand years ago that we knew this, and yet we keep reinvent every time a new project manager comes on board. We reinvent this whole thought process.
I agree with you, and it is thousands of years, both in Eastern and Western thought. We figured this out, but in Western civilization, the philosophers who promote leadership and promote the giving the team, giving the workers a little authority, were the ones who were treated very poorly. We know what happened to Socrates. We knew what
Yeah.
happened with Seneca and Epictetus. It's not nice. It's funny. Again, this is one of my lifelong head scratchers. I'll never figure out.
Well, given that, let's say, okay, you and I are incredibly wonderful project managers, Tim. I just know that we are. And we have these teams that we develop over time. But have you ever been in a position that, can you define a perfect team? Have you ever had a perfect team?
Oh boy, I never have. Okay, let's take Tuckman's ladder, right? Tuckman's ladder is a model that says groups, just like humans, go through a life cycle, right? And they come together, they form, they get comfortable working with each other, they storm, they learn how to participate with different skills together, they norm, and then they learn how to use that storming to constantly improve, and they call that performing. So what I've learned is over time, every group does this. They form, they storm, they norm, they perform, then they go back to storming, then they go back to performing, then they go back to norming and storming again. And it's just like people. Some months we have everything right and it works smoothly. Some months it's really hard to get the garbage out on a morning, and just like the team. And as a leader, I've learned that a leaderless team has no direction, which is
Yeah.
funny. It really is funny. We are naturally wired to come together as a team, and we're naturally wired to require a leader. It's something built into our physiology. So when you talk about a perfect team, I'm gonna actually modify my normal definition a little bit. And I've been thinking about this over the last 2 years. I think following their natural behavior, if team members know how humans behave as individuals and how humans behave as groups, they can be the best team they can possibly be in the current scenario. Now, what I do know is that teams facing the unknown have some characteristics that we can build into it. And I have wanted to have the perfect team, but I've never had them either. And that's key. So what I'm referring to here is what's called agile and agile project management. And agile is a way of getting work done. It's not a way of managing projects. It's how work is done. For example, when you know the work and you can put together a real good plan, that's called predictive, okay? And predictive projects say, all I have to do is get the plan together, have everybody do their part, and then formally manage change and risk and quality as we go through the plan. And we can respond as a group pretty well. But when you go into the work that's unknown, the team has to have different skills. And that's where we go into this whole concept of, there's no one perfect team. There are different types of teams. And based on the needs of the project, I think you can have pretty close to perfect.
Yeah, and I think well, I gave up on the idea of a perfect team. I probably, well, in 20 states and 2 Canadian provinces where I've either been on a delivery team or run project teams. So that's a lot of projects. Some of those are multiple projects in those states and provinces. When I consider back, probably, I don't know, 40 projects I've done in my career, I can honestly say I've never had a perfect team, as we've discussed, but I can honestly say I've had some incredibly well-functioning teams.
Yes.
And as I thought about this particular question, when I posed it to you, I was thinking a lot of what we've done on this podcast up until now, we've talked about, for example, communication. To have a well-functioning team trying to get to perfection, then you need that incredible communication both down the chain and up the chain. I think you need effective leadership and management. You've already covered that so well this just up until now. And direct leaderless teams become directionless. No, if you have effective leadership and management, you can begin to develop that well-developed team. And I think that begins to kind of feed on itself. The other thing is, in order to give teams direction, you need to have well-defined roles. I'm not sure we've spoken about this much in past podcasts, but I do know that once people understand their role, and even where they're allowed to overlap a little bit, the functioning of that team becomes very much achievable. A good functioning team becomes very much achievable. And then, of course, we've also talked about what's the vision out there. It's not what's today's task that needs to be done. It's what's today's task that needs to be done in relation to what we're achieving by the end of next month, as an example. So you want to present that vision in front of them. And then I think also, and what I found many, many times is the best performing teams I've had are when I've created a harmonious environment. One in which people are allowed to excel, express themselves. They're allowed to defy what's going on if they need to. I mean, defy is a strong word, but basically put up their backs against something and say, no, we can't be doing that. So as long as people are allowed to converse back and forth and not be afraid, not be mushrooms, not be cogs, then you end up with not a perfect team, but you do end up with a well-performing team.
That's the key. And what you're speaking to is the nature of being a human being. Yeah. If you allow people to be natural human beings, and if you understand people and give them the time and the space, I'm not being optimistic. I'm being totally pragmatic. And like you, I've experienced this. I've tried it both ways. And like you, when I did allow people to be humans and give a little bit of flexibility and assume that I didn't know everything, things went a lot better.
Yeah, and so often we as project managers, we demand respect. The way you earn respect is by giving respect.
Yep, that's right. It's trust, and that's the whole thing behind trust. Respect is a value that actually inspires that. Now, let me throw out a term that may or may not resonate with you. When we talk about teams and the dream team, one of the words they use in the current project management training, which you'll find in Scrum and Agile also, is this concept toward self-organizing or generalizing specialists. Have you ever heard this before?
Yeah, I think if I recall, I'm trying to think back to my early consulting days. I think in was it McKinsey who came up with the term T-shaped or T-based or T
Yeah,
something?
McKinsey, Peter Thomas J. Peters and his group, his generation in McKinsey Consulting actually came up with the T-based concept.
And the idea being is that you have deep discipline as well as, so that would be the leg of the T, the deep
Right.
discipline. And then you would have this cross member, which would be sort of a ability to use that discipline, but in various venues or various styles, so that you're able to work cross team, cross project, cross management processes, cross everything, so that you have this agility or flexibility to use your deep discipline in multiple ways. Am I getting close to that?
That's perfect. In fact,
Okay.
let me give you an example that drives this home. Football, or in the US, we call it soccer, right? You have kickers and you have runners and you have blockers. And when you are a coach of a child's team, you go through skills and drills to learn those skills. And you find out who has the strength in kicking, who has a strength in blocking, and who has a strength in running. That's the vertical part of the T. That's your depth, right? Now, the horizontal part of the T is your breadth. And it's your ability to understand how I, as a kicker, work with my runners and blockers, or how I, as a blocker, work with my runners and kickers, right? And so we do our job and we know how our job fits in with all of the others. And that's what we call generalizing specialists. Now, this goes back even further. You've heard of Buckminster Fuller and the geodesic drone,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
so Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth was one of his most popular books. And he talked about this term, and he said, in the 21st century, we're going to be going into the great unknown. And so, how do you train people to become comfortable with the unknown? And he said, we need to go back to hunter gatherers because they were the ultimate team who was ready for the unknown. They didn't know what was going to happen. So they put a bunch of spear guys together. They put a bunch of guys with arrows together. They put a bunch of guys who were runners together. And they put a bunch of guys who had really good eyesight together. And they would work together and use their individual skills as a group to actually survive and thrive. And that's how Fuller dreamed that we're going to be working. Now, Drucker and Deming in the 70s and 80s said that there's an add-on to this. We call this information management or knowledge management. And these people are no longer going to be skills workers. They're going to be knowledge workers. And so it's not so much the skills they're going to learn. They're going to have to pick up skills along the way, but they're going to have to invest deeply and very deeply, very quickly on number one, how to pick up skills quickly, and number two, how to organize as a group quickly. So just because we're leaving post-industrial society and we're going into this knowledge society, we have to embrace this. This is not this is not just to have a good, happy project. This is a survival mechanism.
Well, and if I think the way you just described it, if I think even to actual team usage of this particular concept, in my experience, I have had developers as an example. We'll use developers for the example. who have incredibly deep knowledge of how to use their programming skills or how to use whatever they need to be. And as they've developed that, they've become very relied upon to do that. But it's interesting to me that as I watched them over the years, they didn't really progress in their careers. Now, their sister developer sitting in the cubicle next to them, less skilled in the deep development technologies, had this ability to collaborate. They had the ability to talk well with their project manager. They could deal well with their customer. If they got stuck in a development program, they could go to the subject matter expert from the client side and ask some questions. And it's interesting how those people grew in their careers very quickly. They weren't as talented in terms of the deep skills, but they were very broadly oriented in terms of, I think you've said it, the horizontal view of how it is that they ran their careers. And when they became adept at that, they progressed very quickly in their careers.
Yes, and what type of skills are they learning on the horizontal part of the T? They're learning responsibility. They're not waiting for people to give them direction. Accountability. They know that if they don't get it done, nobody does. And if it's successful, it's because of their work. They're having to learn really good self-awareness and emotional intelligence. They're going to have to learn how to motivate, influence. They have to learn leadership skills. Now, the problem with project management and with general management is when I start off, if I start teaching people what I know, I'm giving away my secret sauce. And so I'm afraid to teach people this stuff, or I'm afraid to delegate because I'm giving a piece of my power away. It took 4 vice presidents at a Fortune 50 corporation to actually convince me that when you help people climb, they don't push you out, they push you up.
Yeah.
And that is something you cannot learn from a book. You have to learn from experience.
I'll tell you how I learned it. Every time I hired someone, they were better than me. So I figured I better do something to increase my value to the company that's not just based on development skills. And so, yeah, in many ways, I tell you, some of those young people that we hired out of college and out of community colleges with the deep technical experience, I mean, within months surpassed my technical knowledge. But fortunately, I had also developed that horizontal set of skills where I could deal with people side and the collaboration side and got the client to like me a lot. So from that perspective, I ended up being much more insulated against what could happen, in case of downturns or whatever, than the person with deep skills. But yeah, a lot of times I was pushed up because I thought, wow, I have to survive. These kids are smart. And I say kids now because, I've been in the trenches for a long time, but these young people are smart.
Yeah. What's the one lesson you wish you could teach somebody just entering consulting or project management?
I think it is absolutely what we just talked about, and that is to develop those collaborative mechanisms where even if let's say you are deeply skilled in something, find someone to share it with. You get your piece of the project done early, go over and help someone else who's struggling. Just be that person who deals well with other people. Start at the team level, work well with your project manager or your team leader, work well with the client. And as you develop those collaboration skills, what forces you into even improving more is the fact that you have to develop your communication skills along with that, whether written or oral. I think you mentioned the term self-awareness. You have to become self-aware. So I think it all comes back to people versus people. And then all of these other things begin to develop quite naturally as you mature in your career. That's the advice I would give.
Okay, there's one more piece to this pie that I would add. 3 sentences I repeat every day in my classes. Slow down, take a breath, and think it through. We leave university, and university teaches you analysis and it teaches you critical thinking. But we think that when we have a degree, it's a skill. It's not. A degree is the attainment of the understanding that I know how to learn. And it's the beginning of the journey. It's not the end. And if we can actually have that as a leadership skill, that deep understanding of the role of analysis and constant learning, I think we have the perfect solution to actually, help a dream team become the dream team.
So is there any danger in someone becoming too generalized, you think?
I don't know. I really don't know because from my experience, my opinion is that when I became generalized, I focused more on the leadership aspect and less on the technical or skilled aspect. And I know coaches in sports teams, when they start seeing somebody who is really good at working with the rest of the team, they make them the captain. They make them a project lead. It's a measure of two things. One, it's a measure of experience, and two, it's a measure of confidence. And when I see that confidence go up, I know that there is a risk. That risk is that person is going to get really bored.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking, even as I asked you that question, it flashed through my mind a couple of experiences. And if we have any sales people listening to us right now, you're going to hate me. But I've had two situations where salespeople became so generalized that they would sell something for the sake of the sale and not necessarily get the more the technical team or the business oriented team involved so much in that. So the sale was everything, and then you guys go in and figure it out. We'll write the proposal to win, and you guys go and deliver what we promised, and you guys can figure it out. I think in those cases, and by the way, let me back up a little bit. I've also worked with people on the sales side who were very cognizant of the fact that they had to get the development team involved in the sale so that what they sold was doable, manageable, estimatable, and doable all around. So
and also valuable.
Valuable, yeah.
See, that's the key. And the thing is, if you do get general for the sake of the sale instead of for the sake of the value, you lose the whole reason for a project. And a project in consulting is solving a problem, and people will pay you to solve a problem. People will not pay you to do work. And you're exactly right. I think people can be generalized, and once we establish that, I think people can focus on the wrong objective. And I think that's where we're going with this part of the conversation.
Well, and I'm even thinking back to my own career, and I don't know if I fell into this or somehow I figured this out, but I began developing programming on IBM 360s. This is the old mainframes that took up entire floors of office buildings. Worked from there to I think they were called mini computers, then to client server systems, and then to the internet. And the internet actually was there while the internet was maturing, and it's quite mature now. So I was thinking as I looked at this, having gone through all of those technologies, and you think 360 mainframe with 128 kilobytes of information to have your programs work in versus your iPhone that you can create computer programs on now that are far more sophisticated than anything we did back 40 years ago. To be able to kind of go across that entire spectrum of technology and still maintain relevancy in the industry, I think speaks to the general nature, that T-shaped nature of what it is that we need to be doing, not relying so much on the in-depth skills, but having enough information or understanding of those in-depth skills that you can work through any kind of problems that are there. At least understand problems when they're given to you.
So here's the question. You have a team of recent college grads, and they're all big in their skills. How do you get them to come together? And how do you work with them?
Well, if they're new college grads, sometimes that's easier than dyed-in-the-wool developers or the team.
Let's take both scenarios. I think both of them are fascinating.
Yeah, because new college grads, first of all, I would never create a team of all new college grads. I would create a team of a mix where I want my new grads, my new initiates, I want them to be mentored along, even as they give us the benefit of their superior skills, and they have superior skills. So I think a couple of things. One is make sure that they are given mentorship. Provide solid mentorship, not just someone who is there that they can ask questions of, but someone who could truly mentor them. The other thing is, and what I've done with anybody in my team, whether they're new grads or people with 5, 6, 10 years experience coming onto my project, is I've sat them down, walked through the entire project in terms of what it is that we're trying to get to, the overall vision, and make sure that they understand that they can always come with their questions. They can always come with their ideas. They can always come with, sometimes there's some head scratchers as to why a client is acting that way, or why something is performing that way, or what are they missing. So there's always that back and forth communication ability. And I think the third thing I always strived to do when I was a project manager, or at least a lead on a project, was to make sure that I maintained transparency. If I made a mistake, I admitted that I made the mistake. I didn't try to point a finger somewhere else. And through that whole transparency thing, people felt they could develop that confidence in me and the rest of my teammates as someone they could rely upon for their own careers. So that's kind of a lot of words, but that's kind of how I go about it.
Very good. So basically, you're demonstrating the skills and the other competencies that you want these team members to live up to.
Yeah.
You're showing them. You're not telling them, but you're showing them.
Right. Right. And there's a certain amount of telling there because people have to be informed, but truly, yes, showing is if you're demonstrating that you yourself are vulnerable, that you yourself are transparent, that you yourself are competent and skilled. And I used to have people come into my office and say, how did you turn that client around so quickly? And they'd watch the skill in real time. And so, yeah, there was a lot of demonstration of what that means. And I missed one. Always respect the person. Always respect the person. I would have people who were administrative assistants, brand new, wide-eyed, didn't even know how to use an Excel spreadsheet. They got as much respect as my database person because they were part of the team.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And we all move together. There's that other part you mentioned early in our conversation today. Making it easy, creating that environment for them to do their work well, not allowing any disruptions. A lot of my newly emerging project managers are saying, I can't change the organization. My organization is toxic. My management is dysfunctional. And I say, I hereby give you permission to run your project the way you get success. And the way you get success is going to demonstrate to the organization. It's not going to change today, and it's not going to change tomorrow. But number one, you get a little reprieve. You give your team members a little reprieve. And over time, your success will play out.
It takes time. It takes patience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some very toxic bosses. One I did walk out on. and literally left the job at some point because it would just, at some point, if you can't perform, but typically you just work with those people in a way that even if they're slamming you for something, you're still coming back and being good at what you do and showing through your performance that despite their criticism or whatever it is that they're throwing your way, despite that you're still able to perform well. And it does take patience. It does take, and I've seen some great turnarounds for myself from some of my counterparts where they've turned the boss from a toxic person to a believer.
Yeah, yeah. So that really talks about the environment. Now, what if you have a team member that doesn't seem to fit in? How do you manage that?
Yeah, have you ever had a team where someone didn't fit in? I think we've always had that, right? Where
Oh
someone
yeah, oh yeah,
where
oh yeah.
someone
A great example was I had a naysayer, and my supervisor sat in on a team meeting, and this guy would say, "No, no, didn't you consider this? Didn't you think about this? I'm surprised you didn't bring this up." And they were constantly this way. And my supervisor actually took me for a cup of coffee down the cafeteria and said, "Tim, it was a great meeting." And I said, "Why? I was at loggerheads with this guy." And he said, "No, that guy is perfect. And you don't want him to be any different. He's like a canary in a cave. He has less tolerance of risk than anybody else in that meeting. And you can use him as a barometer. You don't have to listen to him. You don't have to have him making decisions. He's giving you advice from a real low tolerance of risk." So I learned it wasn't his fit that was the problem. It was I was perceiving him as having more power than I thought. And my perception was getting in the way of the successful team.
that's interesting because I think I would have thought the same way you initially did, and that this person is problematic. And how do I either turn him or put him in a place where his skills are more desired? That's not on my team, right?
And you know what's funny? The guy came to me a little bit later and I said, "You know what? Once I understood what you were telling me," and he said, "That's what I've been trying to tell everybody." And he said, "Don't, that I'm trying to help the team. I'm not trying to get in the way, but I'm trying to give them advice."
See, I think also in a situation like that, though, and I realize we're going back over something that happened years ago, but I think that was also a learning moment for that person because you could say, okay, and I'm just trying to work this out now in my mind. You could say, okay, now I understand what you're trying to do. Now let's work on how you're delivering the message. I
See,
understand the message is good, but how is it that you're delivering it that's causing people not to understand?
right. And what's our job in this? How do we actually understand this? And there are three things. Number one, we have to assess. And we have to clearly and accurately assess. That means, what are the strengths and weaknesses of these people? I didn't get that right with this person. Okay. Number two, we train. We don't just train in the vertical skill. We train in the horizontal knowledge and attributes.
Yeah.
And that's where I really helped him succeed. I helped him figure out how to position his way of getting work done so it didn't get in the way of the team. It actually enhanced the team. And that was what my job was. I had to assess and train, and then I could validate and come back and make sure what we were talking about worked. Because if you don't validate, there's no progress.
Well, exactly. And I think from his perspective, if he understood that how he was coming across to you, he would also then have to understand that's probably how he's coming across to his team members. And if they're also kind of shunning him or rejecting him or whatever, there's a clue there. There's a very distinct clue there.
And you
You
know
know,
what? And you know what? Without trust, without having a solid relationship with that person, you can't have this conversation. He won't let his guard down
Yeah.
and be natural. See, this is where this whole thing of servant leadership comes into real powerful play, where these people you think are obstacles actually have unique skills, and it's only our limitations that hold the team back. I hate to be so positive about this or so optimistic, but at the same time, this is hitting me right between the eyes constantly, day after day after day, working with my class, working with my students, working with my peers. I have not found anything that invalidates that opinion.
Yeah. And the other thing that I found, I remember this distinctly from both as a team member and also as a project manager, people are watching. And so one of the things that, if no matter what you're doing, even the way you're responding on a phone call within earshot of someone could be a clue as to whether or not they want to follow you or whether or not they want to follow you. But the other thing that I discovered that people really respond to is praise publicly, discipline privately.
Yes.
And when someone sees someone being praised publicly, they think to themselves, wonder how I could get some of that. But at the same time, if they themselves may be disciplined or whatever, but it's done behind closed doors in a kind, respectful manner that is there to help them improve, they also gain that respect for you. They may push back a little bit, but they also gain that respect. So praise publicly, discipline privately.
Right. Right. Wow. So okay. So we're talking about the fact that we're training, right? And we're mentoring and we're coaching, all these things. And we're doing it with our team so the team can work together to actually progress. Now, what type of training? You and I talked about two things, right? We talked about skills, making sure they're deep in their skills. And we talked about attributes, the things that allow them to interact with other team members well. Is there anything else that you need to train them for?
I've been, first of all, I've been part of major corporations that put on strong training effects for all of the new people being promoted to the next level. So if you were being promoted from a developer to an analyst, there was training for that level. If you were being promoted from an analyst to a project lead, there was training at that level. So I am the product of a corporation that did that very well. So they trained in problem solving. They trained in client conversational skills. They trained in things like, actually, I was going to say they trained in, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, watching how people react to certain body language and how people are using that. I wish I could say they did some of that. They didn't. But in some of that training, what they did was they made sure that they were prepared for their next role. Now, in my situation, I've had situations where I personally have been in charge of, say, several project managers. And once every 6 months or so, I would pull all the project managers together and we would go through some varying skills, not necessarily on just something that's coming up, but I would take things that I had noticed on various projects and we would talk through them, and each person would understand how it was that we handled it and how it was that we could have handled it to make it better. And there was no pulling out of project managers saying you did this wrong or you did this right. It just was a learning experience for everyone. Sometimes a project manager would not know what happened on a project that was 1,500 miles away, but as we went through a particular situation on that project, they began to learn from the discussion and were able to contribute to it. So I think there's many ways of doing it, but you always want to be current and you always want to have something in the back of people's minds that prepares them for the next step.
So yes, exactly right. And so when we look in the project management content that talks about training, it doesn't train in skills or attribute. It trains in something called competencies.
Ah, yeah,
Okay. And competencies have three categories. It has the skills, it has the attributes, and then it has knowledge. And you're exactly right. Knowledge comes from retrospectives, like what you did. Knowledge comes from articles and books. And knowledge comes from getting people to talk to each other or having people do research. And one of the things that we don't give time for is that kind of training.
yeah,
Um, One of my mentors, my earliest mentor back in 2000, um, was brilliant. And he was always treating his projects as a little petri dish. And
yeah,
all of his team would go through these little experiments, and he said, try this week. You know, we and what he was doing was he was actually giving them skills to practice on learning about the client, learning about the client culture, learning about the way they made business decisions. Not that this is the best way to do it, but this is the way our current client does it too. So these type of things are what a project manager has to teach also.
well, and I'll tell you one other thing that worked very well for me, and actually developed huge loyalty among people who had worked on my projects and who would then want to come and work on other projects with me. And that was, I also individualized where they were coming or what they wanted to do. So for example, I had a young man, and I was watching him one day in a meeting, and I pulled him aside and I said, you've got a gift in communication in terms of the way you're able to publicly present yourself. I said, I would love to work with you and knock some of the raw edges off and develop some eloquence to what it is that you're saying. Within 6 months, that young man just flew off the scales in terms of his ability to present publicly, whether it was to 20 people or 2,000 people. Well, it wasn't 2,000, 200 people. I had another person for whom English was a second language, wanted to improve their writing skills. So that person, we said, okay, despite you want to improve your skills, you've still got these requirements to work on your project plan. However, if you're willing to put in the extra time, why don't you do the first draft of the status report? We won't present that to the client, but we'll work through with you in terms of dealing with the language issues, the punctuation, whatever it is that was required. Within a few months, she was very adept at being able to put together a very solid technical status report. So again, meeting individuals at their need and working with them takes a little more time, but my goodness, when you end up with that person who has developed a skill that they're proud of, that they did by themselves with a little mentoring, it's amazing how much loyalty you gain from that particular person.
It is. Um, that's also recognition.
Yeah,
um, this is the key. Rewards are nice to have. Recognition is a requirement. People need to be seen, and they need to have that acknowledgement that they are seen. And this is the illness that we have right now with the pandemic. We're all working from home and nobody sees us,
yeah.
and we're all afraid that people are not recognizing our participation in work. So we have to overcome these obstacles of working from home in order to gain recognition. And my newly minted project managers that I'm working with, I'm saying, here's a new toy for you to play with. It's called I Recognize You.
Yeah.
I see you. You are a human being and you are a unique individual. And I like the fact that that you found such satisfaction in having this conversation with these people. It's actually, and this is what I found later in my career, it's more fun to see people experience this stuff for the first time than actually experiencing it myself.
Yeah. I, I was on a call earlier this week with a former Navy commander. She was very adept at what she did as a leader and that. And she's been doing some research. And you mentioned the pandemic. One of the things that she noted from her research was that, and I don't have the numbers exactly correct, but let's say the number was 33%. I don't know that that's correct, but let's say it is. That 33% of millennials, or 33% of many of the mature workers, were saying that if they have to come back to the office when this is all over, they would rather quit the company and move somewhere else where they don't have to work in the office. And I thought, that's a little short-sighted. How do we work with those people? Because the question I asked her at that point was, I said, but there's so much to being in the office in terms of what about the fear of missing out? If you're at home working remotely, working on tasks, and you're not there as part of the socialization of the project team or of the organization, you're missing out. And is there no fear of missing out?
Well, let me give you something that frightened me. Okay, let's talk about Maslow's hierarchy: physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, and esteem needs. Okay, now if I lose my job, and my job is where all those needs get fulfilled, I go through trauma. It's not just a setback. And so I can understand where the millennials are coming from. I don't want to put my apples in one basket. I don't want my house to come crashing down because I saw my parents go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can understand these millennials saying, I don't want to work from home. I'll do 5 to 7 gigs because then I have my social needs fulfilled and I can work on other needs as they become unfulfilled.
Yeah, I may not have explained that correctly, but these people are saying they don't want to come back into the environment. And I
Oh
can,
yeah, yeah, I
yeah,
agree totally.
yeah,
I understand totally, and I can see exactly where they're coming from. Um, and the work environment, it's true. We have physiological needs that are fulfilled when we're face to face with people. We get
yeah,
more information, we get more interaction, we have some type of sense that says team that we cannot get when we're remotely working.
yeah.
And we all agree on that. On
And
the other hand, there are ways to actually overcome some of these obstacles to a point. And while society is working this out, and we cannot keep society from working this out because it started and we're on this train, while society's working this out, we have to actually make sure that we're successful through this. So, we're, like it or not, we're international.
yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it too is working with millennials or working with, and I shouldn't be picking on millennials. I think it was just that this particular research happened to deal with millennials. But if you end up with a situation where people say, no, no, I'm just going to always work from home, I think part of what you may want to work with people like that is to suggest that, if you don't have, I think you mentioned the social aspects, and then what was Maslow's top one? It's the
Oh, there was physiological, safety, social, esteem, and
esteem.
self-actualization.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at the social part that I may be missing out on because my organization may not be particularly good at the remote Zooming or whatever they're using. And if I'm missing out on the esteem part, and I do happen to lose my job, if there's a downsizing or something, now do I have people who have my back when I go looking for that next gig? And I think that's I think there's a happy medium, and you're right. We as society, we're not going back to the old way.
Mhm.
We're just not. There's going to be some sort of hybrid approach to this whole thing. And I think that we just need to be very cognizant of where people are coming from and how it is that they're feeling in terms of, I mean, let's face it, if I'm working remotely, and you and I are both working remotely these days, I get a lot done because it's 13 seconds from my bedroom to my office.
Well, and not only that, and not only that, there's the comfort and the relaxation that you may not have
Yeah.
in an office. You're more naturally who you are.
Yeah.
We might want to actually pursue this. Um, um, the benefits and best practices
Of
of work.
remote work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one, especially from us as project managers. How do you work a team? I mean, whether you've got a team of 5 or some of the cases where I've been on, where you've got a team of 300, how do you keep things moving along? And that's, yeah, I would like to do some research and do a podcast on that. That'd be great.
Good, good. It's on the list.
So I think our time here is drawing to a close. We've started with cogs and mushrooms and ended up with remote workers. But I think it's been a great discussion from a project management perspective and how to treat our teams.
Yes, yes, very valuable. I really appreciate your insight, Merv. Now, for more questions or just to follow you, where can the public go and see what you're doing?
2 places, Merv Jursak, and I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a page out there that I need to get better at becoming more responsive to people who are asking me a lot of questions. But yes, there's things on LinkedIn that I'm sharing, and there's some articles that will be written here shortly. But also, I've spent a lot of time on developing my website, especially the blog posts, and that's called peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. And I've got a lot of information up there as well in terms of my offerings, my services. 156 blog posts on these kinds of aspects of project management that I found instructive just in terms of doing the research to write them.
That's the objective. That's the objective.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm over at LinkedIn right now. You can find my articles and my availability through there primarily. I still teach online, and you can just search me up and you can find me where I am.
All right. So I think until next time, we will bid adieu at this point.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Always a joy to be interacting with you.
Until next week. Until next week.
Thanks again.